Thank you, guys. We've got 4 amazing, you want HDMI? Ratio, let's do it that way. 4 amazing guys to come and help talk to us to this, who are all involved at this kind of thing in different areas. So I'm going to introduce Jeremy Kelleher, who works for Fairfax as an architect, information architect of all sorts of amazing things. Oh, now I can see this and I can actually read what I
Jack of all
wrote
trades,
in here.
master
Jack of all trades. His most recent gig is for Head of Architecture for Product Solutions at Fairfax, publisher of hundreds of news, commercial, lifestyle and community sites. And I had the good fortune of meeting Jeremy when I, through my work with XWP at News. So if you want to take a seat, Jeremy.
I will.
And then we'll introduce Peter Wilson, who is a front-end developer based in Melbourne, one of my best friends and a great all-round guy who does amazing things with making websites fast. Pete works for Human Made. Reynard Korp, who I've just met this weekend, but with whom I've been working for the last couple of months on a project for XWP. And Reynard is an engineer and teacher and trainer in WordPress. And Dion Beatson, who I have also had the good fortune to work with through my time with XWP in his role as an amazing developer and champion for WordPress actually at News Corp. So give these guys a really big hand.
Thanks,
This is supposed to be working.
Questions.
Does that come up then?
Yep.
Okay, so that's everybody. So my first question for the panel is, how do you define scalable WordPress platforms?
Good question, isn't it?
It's a good question. Who wants to go first?
I can jump in. I guess for us at News, so probably in a lot of companies are probably quite similar, where it's more than just the code. It's more than how you write code that can support 1 user or 1 million users a day. That's one aspect of it. But for us, because we're rolling out quite large sites, it's how does that whole platform integration work? Like from the point that content gets ingested into WordPress all the way through that workflow until it gets rendered on the front end. It's how does your non-production environment setup work? How does your production environment setup work? How can you scale that up and spin up new environments very quickly? It's lastly your path to production. It's how quickly can a developer get code from the start of their local environment all the way to production, and how quickly can a new developer do that? So for us, it's that whole entirety of that developer workflow.
Anybody have anything to add to that? So how do projects like these differ from solutions built using off-the-shelf plugins and themes? Reynard.
So I guess there's a. All right. I guess there's a lot of really good open source plugins out there, and there's really good off-the-shelf products. But when I first started working in WordPress, I worked on premium plugins. That's what I did. But from the feedback that we got from a lot of our customers was that the features that they wanted and the expectations they had of our off-the-shelf plugins was that there was just such a large gap. So I think when we're talking scalable sites like sites Dion's talking about, there's just not an off-the-shelf product, and inevitably you will end up customizing something. If I am going to start with a plugin though, I've got a vetted list of plugins, and the probably a good place to start is vip.wordpress.com/plugins. That's a very good place to start if you're going to look at an off-the-shelf plugin, but inevitably you're going to do some extra development.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, I was going to sort of reinforce that. Often when we are using off-the-shelf plugins, we look at them, we go through them line by line, look at each line of code, consider all the best practices, security practices are in there. There's, the WordPress coding standards, which I spoke about a little bit yesterday. That I'm less concerned about as long as it's sort of consistently coded, which suggests that the developer of the plugin cares about their code, but it's very much the sort of sanitization, escaping, that sort of thing. And, you know, also looking at some of the queries in there and making sure that they'll actually scale so that there's faster queries and slower queries when you run WordPress, and we're looking for the faster ones.
Yeah, I guess there's a couple of aspects of this. Usually at a big company, there will be some style guide. Ours is called Landmark, and there's really no off-the-shelf theme that would implement Landmark, I can tell you. Landmark's we've got a relatively large UX team, so we need to turn what they've come up with into a concrete WordPress theme. And we also tend to have a lot of integrations that perhaps you don't see except when you're at scale. So a lot of our analytics platforms and things are not probably common things. And a lot of our integration points are things like, we use Amazon Kinesis really heavily, and there's really nothing off the shelf to hook you into Amazon Kinesis, so at least not for the purpose we're using it. So that's kind of what I would say. It's the themes, and we just need custom plugins because we have integrations that probably aren't common in the community yet. Although, you know, there's some sort of activity around obviously improving certain core things like Customizer that comes through from these projects actually, because there are core committers actually working in these teams often. So I mean, Western being a great example at XWP as an example, but there's a few other examples in this room actually.
I guess it's one of the significant things that I've seen is the extent of the external things that we've had to integrate in some of these platforms that you just wouldn't have had to think about if you're doing a client site, really. We're getting more and more bigger business client sites that have integrations like Infusionsoft and some of all of these other kind of external things that you can plug in, but you get it scaled.
Especially,
the
extent
extent
for us,
of
it
them.
was that content ingestion, right?
That's a big one for us.
How do you import an article? It updates every about 26 updates a second, and you try and do that with WP Cron, as everyone knows, just it's not going to work.
Did somebody say yesterday it's not a real cron? Was that you, Jeremy?
Yeah, I mean, the volumes for a large publisher, like I obviously work at Fairfax now and I've worked at News, are really high, and I think even perhaps some like very well experienced people in the WordPress community were a bit surprised how high those volumes are. We publish thousands of stories a day and we update them a lot.
I think we were even surprised as well, like once we actually saw it flowing through, how many updates actually go through compared to just,
wow.
We were thinking 3 or 4, but it's definitely a lot more.
Yeah, so volumes is another thing. And also syndication's a big deal. We have a lot of sites and we have to spread the content between the sites, and there's really nothing off the shelf in WordPress that handles syndication well.
It is fascinating
with Canonical and
at the VIP workshop how there's all these different companies trying to tackle syndication and how it can work in WordPress, and everyone's sort of tackled it in their own way, some within WordPress, some without. And it's probably a good opportunity for a lot of us to work together and build like a standard way of doing it.
Yeah, I think we talked about headless a bit, which is really important, but just to sort of frame it, we're like it's going to sound a bit strange, but we're another level beyond that because we syndicate through hubs because we've got lots and lots of systems and not all of them are WordPress. So we kind of have to do syndication at another scale than just having like a headless CMS, which is like step one from my point of view. But we have to go through hubs as well so that we can syndicate that content to tens of WordPress instances or hundreds of WordPress instances.
So that's specifically unique to the publishing industry?
Yeah, that one is, for sure. Although I think a lot of large companies have similar issues. Like large companies often have marketing, they have sales, they have a whole heap of departments, and those departments need access to the same content. So, so I would say even at a non-publisher, that would be an issue if you were talking about, I don't know, a large petrochemical company or something. You'd discover there's lots of departments there, and just their internal syndication, even their intranet, if you want to look at it that way, would be actually quite complicated because there'd be a lot of departments. So.
Okay, let's go on a little bit in terms of people approaching this kind of work and wanting to get involved in this kind of thing. They rely on a diverse teams of cross-discipline skills. So the question is, how do you recruit developers to build teams like this, and what do you look for?
Ooh.
As a person who was recruited, I think you're...
No, look, we definitely just, when we had to spin up XWP were really closely with them over the last 18 months, and then we had to obviously spin up our internal team so we could work hand in hand. And one of the approaches we took was we didn't necessarily go out there and just go, we're only looking for WordPress engineers, because that's pretty hard. There's a lot of developers, but it is quite hard. So we sort of looked around and went looking for engineers that had worked with multiple frameworks, multiple platforms. Some people we brought on board had WordPress experience, some didn't. But as you guys all know, if you've got that exposure to multiple platforms and technologies, you can pretty easily pick up a new tech stack or a new language framework. So that's definitely probably one of the key things we chose. And as long as you find that balance between people who really want to drive change, you don't want someone to come in and just code away. It's sort of like you want the people to voice their opinions when things should be done differently and really drive for improvement. I think we've struck a pretty good balance in News Corp specifically, and then how News Corp worked with XWP as well over the last 2 years.
Anybody have anything to add?
No, I kind of agree with that. I don't think you're always going to find a WordPress dev. And I mean, there's two kinds of PHP devs. There's ones who are thoughtful about what they're doing, I think, and don't mind if it's WordPress or whatever else, as long as things are being done properly. And there are people who are dyed-in-the-wool Symfony stack people or whatever, and you're never going to convert those guys probably, and you probably shouldn't try. So I think we tend to look for people.
I've been pretty close to being converted.
Yeah, there's a few.
I was Symfony and now WordPress
Sometimes
all
takes
the
a
way.
while. I mean, people do have epiphanies, right? I mean, I myself am an example of this. I had an epiphany at WordCamp in some ways. So, but I don't consider myself a dyed-in-the-wool anything. So that's probably why I'm capable of having an epiphany. But anyway.
So I guess there's a takeaway in that for a lot of us, and that this is the kind of thing that we want to get into, is to spread our net a little bit wider and have a look at what else is out there.
There's also, actually, I'll just quickly add something. We didn't look for people as well who'd worked on massive, large-scale projects. It was
absolutely not.
People who maybe knew how to do it or had done something similar but on a smaller scale, because when you work with other people who might have done scalability at a large level, you can adopt and adapt and you can learn quite well. So it wasn't, just if you haven't worked on those projects, don't feel like you can't.
Yeah, a desire. I mean, being here is a really good indicator, by the way. I think community engagement is one of the key things with any open source CMS, but definitely with the big ones. And so being here is a good indicator that you'd be that this might be something you'd be interested in.
Yeah, for sure.
And obviously, if you've ever done any commit, that's interesting.
Well,
If you've ever done any, it's a bit spooky. Involved at all sorts of levels, right? So there's always stuff to help with.
It's also a good opportunity to get involved in the REST API. Like I know at NewsCorp, we built our own API initially
That's a hint.
because we had to, but even there's many endpoints that need creating. There's many things that need to happen, and it's probably the one key thing, in my opinion, that drives more adoption of WordPress, especially from the front-end space. So.
If you check the backlog of things that need doing, they're not all really technical things as well. There's lots of documentation tasks. There's a ton of those backed up, I think. So there's all sorts of things people can help with. It's not just hardcore, PHP code. There's actually a bunch of other stuff that needs doing as well. So, get onto .org and have a look, but there's more work to do than there is people to do it, frankly.
This is a whole learn by doing, isn't it? It's not like, hey,
absolutely.
here's a course, go and do this course, and there are plenty of those to do, but, the best hands-on on the ground way to kind of learn and
it's really tough to fail, but you're going to fail when you first start doing these things, but that's okay. Like, nobody's...
No shame in that.
There might be a few people who might be, I don't know. I don't think so. I haven't really stuck anybody bad, so I think just do it, and that will really help. Yeah, I agree.
Thank you. How are we going for time, Will?
I think
10
we've got a
minutes.
future core committer up the back there.
Well, I kind of wonder if, there's a couple of other questions in there, but I wonder if before we go there, are there any questions actually from the audience that...
Good idea.
Because I can keep asking questions, but if you're sitting there going, I'm burning up, I really want to ask them this question, I'm quite happy to hand it over. David, up the back there.
Right,
Sorry, Will. You could do your WordPress 5K in the room today.
When you're talking about the coding of WordPress, are you talking about the basic WordPress that runs the website, or your coding to do the individual website?
So you're talking about the difference between the core WordPress code, the software that actually runs the site?
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering. When they're talking about coding, when they want to do code reviews and stuff like that, they're actually talking about changing the actual open source code. What language is WordPress written in, actually?
Okay, so in terms of when I'm talking about contributing to core, I'm talking about the PHP and so forth that runs WordPress itself. But I think generally when everyone on stage is talking about code reviews, they're talking sort of in this context of the code that they write for the project. So they're talking about plugins, we're talking about themes, we're
JavaScript
talking
and CSS.
Yeah, JavaScript, CSS,
Yes,
PHP, anything that you use to write the code and produce the website. Certainly where I work is every line is code reviewed. So yeah, all the code is essentially the answer there.
It's actually really easy to forget things like CSS, CSS is a programming language in its own funny way, so it's actually really important that that code gets reviewed as well, because it's very easy to screw it up, frankly. CSS is a particularly sharp sword for chopping your toes off with, I think. So. Sorry to any CSS lovers in the room, but it can be quite lethal if it's used badly, so it's worse than PHP, I think.
I was going to say, it's a good culture to have. Like, a few of the teams that we had, especially working with XWP, we did a lot of code reviews. And then when we started to introduce it into other teams as we rolled out more and more sites, the first few weeks was always like, everyone was treading cautiously and carefully, because they're like, oh, people are reviewing my code. But then you look a month down the track and they love it. Like, it's getting someone else to give their tick of approval that your code's good, or vice versa, gives you that peace of mind. If something goes wrong, it wasn't just your fault.
It's not just you, it's the other guy as well.
Yeah, you can blame them. You can share the blame a little bit.
The other thing, Peter's mentioning contributing to core or making changes to core. He's not saying hacking core on your website.
No, that's a very good distinction.
There's a very clear distinction.
That's a bad sign.
Yeah. So don't actually hack core on your website, but it's contributing to core through track and submitting patches.
Yeah, which may or may not make it into core in any great hurry, right? But that's kind of not the point. Like, the point is that you've identified a problem and tried to solve it. So.
Have many people here gone through the code review process in submitting core changes?
Hands up.
Nice.
There's a few.
Very cool, come on.
Yeah. Anyone been rejected?
I think that's good, though. That's what I was saying about failure. I don't think that's a problem. I think you should do it anyway. And if it gets rejected, to be honest, the rejection may not mean there's anything wrong with what you did, because I think there's some things in the backlog to get out into core that have been sitting there for 2 years that probably should have been committed 2 years ago. But there's been some, there's always contention in that core team to get it actually into the code base. So, and there's always competing priorities. Like the API at the moment is a very high priority, obviously. So it's probably crowding out a few other things. But
are there any other questions from the floor?
Hang on, Isabel.
Here we go.
Hi, if we're talking about contributing and code reviews and how to get into WordPress, another good way, especially if you're a front-end developer, is submitting a theme to the theme directory, because that also gets a really strict code review. You learn a lot from the process.
Yeah, I mean, all the community processes are there for a reason. So if you're doing something for yourself, I think I said this yesterday, you should follow the community processes. They've developed over a lot of years, and they're not stupid. They're there to stop people mucking up the .org repos, right? So you should probably be following those practices, and they're really well documented, actually. Yeah, it's insanely well documented. So.
Were you going to say something then, Pete?
Yeah, sorry, Pete.
Well, I was just going to sort of check in with, the others, who here on stage, the code review process is based off the practices developed throughout the community. Is it sort of everyone on stage, or?
Well, I mean, I did my talk because I've walked into a bit of a mess. I think at News Corp we set the culture up when I was there, and I was sort of part of that, although the people like Dion were far more influential, I think I can safely say. But it's the other way around at Fairfax, where I'm trying to kind of clean things up. So what I was talking about is what's happening in the best areas, but that's got to be spread out across the whole organisation. And they're all really keen. That's the thing. There's no resistance to that. People want to do things right? Everybody wants to do things properly. Nobody really wants to make their own lives hard, I don't think.
I think the other thing too is if what you're learning and wanting to improve your skills in the PHP is you don't always have to start with committing to core, but there are a bunch of other plugins that
Lots
are
of
open
plugins.
source that people are you've got a plugin that you really want to use or that you use and you want to see some adjustments to, get in touch with the plugin developer or get behind a community around a particular plugin and contribute there, which is a lower barrier to entry. There's no barrier to entry to either really other than your skill and how intimidated you feel. So that's another place to start, I think.
Or in a specialised area, because there are sub-communities. There was some talk I know about its use for churches, which is a particular sub-community of the WordPress user base. There's people who use it for that. And I think, there's plenty, if you're interested in that, there's plenty to be done there. So there's always these sub-communities as well who are using WordPress for particular things, like online stores obviously is another one, right? That's a very specific area that a lot of people do. So,
anyone else? Thanks, Will.
Yeah, last question.
Last question? Excellent.
Look, you opened the CSS, so I've got a couple of questions about that. I've looked at some of the coding of the CSS through some of the base themes, and if you change the margin, like WordPress has, hey, we've got a margin of 1,000 and something on this side and a margin on something, and it would seem to my mind that you've done that to protect the integrity of the theme as people are doing things, but it's not necessarily best practice. Would that be a reasonable assessment of why certain things have been done?
I'm not sure I'm the best person to answer that question, so I might defer to my more code experienced colleagues. But yeah, I think...
Pete, front end.
Okay, I've just been thrown in.
I have been dumped in that one, mate.
There's, there's often in all development, there's pragmatism and there's making pragmatic decisions, and I think that does apply and can apply, particularly in CSS. And I think that how CSS is written is and could be debated for the next 5 years, and I've seen a massive evolution in the way people are discussing writing CSS since this time last year when 2016 was written, and 3 years ago when 2012 was written, there's been pretty much a revolution. So these things are constantly evolving, and the practice is changing, and I think that that's probably something everyone on stage is seeing within their own organisations.
I think the fact that we have to use tools like SAS is a dead giveaway that there's a problem personally, but I would say that because I'm more of a coder than a front-end guy. But I think it's sort of an admission of failure almost that you have to use another language to generate the CSS. I don't think that's a good sign myself, but there's a lot of history behind that you could read up on online. There's lots of interesting discussion about why CSS is the way it is, I think.
Yeah, and I know that the CSS working group does think about backward compatibility.
Well, that's another issue,
while trying to drag, CSS forward into the way people are wanting to use it to this day.
And browser compatibility, which is important to remember because the base themes have to support a whole range of browsers, and CSS has some interesting dark corners, I'm sure you can attest, based on the browser you're in, and we've all seen those horrible workarounds in the resets and whatever, right? So we all know there's issues. So, and I think it's a broad, those themes are designed to be broadly used, not necessarily, like if you want a theme that does exactly what you want, build a theme, I think is the point. Don't try and use the off-the-shelf themes, because it's probably not going to work.
I think we're going to have to leave it there.
Yep.
Thanks, guys. Thanks to these guys for giving up their time to do this.